Formula One fans, they've found the Mercedes trick. But there's an enormous problem nobody expected. Johnny Herbert revealed Mercedes had engine ignition problems during the assembly phase. For months, people have talked about the Mercedes engine as the best on the grid, approximately 15 horsepower advantage with the famous compression ratio. But watch out, because behind the scenes, not everything seems so straightforward. Herbert, someone who knows the paddock extremely well, recounted hearing interesting whispers. During initial engine installations in the car's rear section, ignition problems reportedly emerged. Translated, the engine simply wouldn't start. Herbert is very clear he's not talking about official information from teams, but about persistent rumors circulating in the environment. And this clashes directly with the idea of Mercedes already light years ahead of the competition. Everyone says they're better positioned than anyone else for 2026, Herbert recounts. But from what I hear, it doesn't seem that way at all. And then there's Red Bull, who won't use the Mercedes compression ratio trick. Stay with me because what I'm about to tell you will change everything. At the center of controversies is always the famous compression ratio, which, according to some sources, could be worth approximately 15 horsepower advantage. In other words, in common narrative, whoever wants to win in the next regulatory cycle must chase Mercedes. But watch out, because behind the scenes, not everything seems so straightforward. Filtering some doubt was precisely Johnny Herbert, someone who knows the paddock extremely well, not only as a former driver but also for his long role as Federation steward. Herbert recounted hearing rather interesting whispers in the final development phases of the 2026 power unit. According to these sources, during initial engine installations in the car's rear section, ignition problems reportedly emerged. Translated, the engine simply wouldn't start. Herbert is very clear he's not talking about official information from teams, but about persistent rumors circulating in the environment. And this is where the story gets interesting, because it clashes directly with the idea of Mercedes already light years ahead of the competition. Everyone says they're better positioned than anyone else for 2026, Herbert recounts. But from what I hear, it doesn't seem that way. It should be said this wouldn't even be the first time. Already in 2023, on the eve of a Silverstone shakedown, there was talk of packaging and assembly problems on Mercedes. At the time, there were no real consequences on Mercedes' W14 development, also because the engine was frozen and you couldn't intervene on performance. This time, though, the context is completely different. There's lots of simulator work and also dyno testing on the 2026 engine, which is new, complex, still in full development phase. Herbert himself indeed still invites calm. New regulations, new car, new balances. It's normal there are also small initial problems, especially in the startup phase. The difference, as always, will be made by the transition from factory to track. Because it's one thing to make everything work on the dyno, in the simulator. Another is to start the engine and really make it work under stress during tests. And it's precisely for this reason the Mercedes engine will continue to generate discussion for a long time until cars hit the track. Every certainty until now will remain provisional. The real power relationships of 2026 we'll discover only when we stop talking about rumors and chronometers and facts start talking. So, in my opinion, this small ignition problem Mercedes had won't completely destabilize the Brackley team. Certainly it's a small problem they didn't want to have, but we'll see how Mercedes hits the track, what reliability problems, if any, Mercedes has in Barcelona. It'll be there, we'll see real facts. Obviously these remain rumors and whispers, but said by Johnny Herbert, who's a Formula One insider, well, it's a voice that weighs heavily. And in Formula One's 2026 regulations, there's one point the FIA decided to secure more than all others, and it's a point that doesn't concern wings, chassis, suspensions. It concerns fuel. Actually, to be precise, it concerns how fuel is measured. Because in 2026, the real technical battlefield won't only be how much fuel enters the engine, but how much energy from that fuel it's able to generate. And this is where everything changes, because the FIA put in black and white a very clear tightening. Stop to any gray areas on power unit sensors. The classic maximum flow rate limit isn't enough anymore. From 2026, regulations introduce a precise energy cap, 3,000 megajoules per hour. This means fuel stops being simple consumption and becomes a strategic performance variable. The data no longer comes from a single number, but from the intersection between the flow meter and fuel energy certifications, validated by independent entities. The standardized ECU acts as mathematical brain, transforming flow rate into energy actually usable by the engine. Essentially, this is where a silent war opens, because with equal maximum allowed energy, a more energy-dense fuel allows embarking less mass with direct advantages on overall car weight, balance, and race management. In other words, chemistry risks counting more than mechanics and will make the difference in the end. If fuel becomes treasure, the flow meter is the guardian. With the transition to Alain Gras as sole supplier, the FIA raises technical security level. There are no longer two separate sensors, but a single integrated unit designed to make any signal manipulation impossible. Internal ducts have different geometries. Measurement frequencies don't coincide and are protected by anti-jamming systems. From a technological standpoint, the leap is enormous. The new sensor works between 4 and 6 kHz, up to 6,000 measurements per second. An unreachable level for traditional Coriolis sensors, and for this, Alain Gras developed a 20,000 kHz ultrasonic system. And here emerges the real political message of 2026 regulations. The FIA isn't just updating a component, it's definitively closing wounds left by past controversies, particularly those that exploded in 2009 with Ferrari. The flow meter is no longer a simple sensor. It becomes the guarantor of sporting fairness. In 2026, Formula One makes a clear choice. Not just measure how much fuel is burned, but how intelligently it's transformed into performance. But we must talk about another even hotter point. It's confirmed Red Bull won't have the famous compression ratio trick that's instead been attributed to Mercedes. And especially at the moment, the Red Bull 2026 engine isn't expected to be at the same level as the constructor considered leader on the power unit front, namely Mercedes. Not by chance. Among those who pushed hardest for regulatory clarifications with the FIA was also Audi. It's Audi, the brand that complained with most force about this alleged Mercedes advantage. Sign the theme is taken very seriously behind the scenes. This is the situation. They found the Mercedes compression ratio trick approximately 15 horsepower advantage. But engine ignition problems emerge. Johnny Herbert Insider reveals persistent rumors. Initial engine installations wouldn't start. Assembly problems development phase. Not Mercedes' first time. 2023 Silverstone packaging problems. Herbert invites calm, normal initial problems, new regulations. Difference will be factory to track transition. Real power relationships will discover when chronometers talk, not rumors. Fuel becomes fundamental. FIA secures measurement, 3,000 megajoule per hour energy cap, dense fuel war less mass weight / balance advantages. New Alain Gras sensor single integrated impossible to manipulate, 6 kHz 6,000 measurements per second, closes 2009 Ferrari controversies. Red Bull won't have Mercedes trick. Red Bull engine not same Mercedes level. Audi complained most forcefully alleged advantage. Barcelona will see real Mercedes reliability facts. Ignition problem doesn't destabilize, but it's voice that weighs from Herbert Insider.